Well, the world is full of power games, isn't it? You don't need me to tell you that. So many things in the world can be interpreted in that kind of a way, can't they? You will have seen in the news this week negotiations between President Trump and Hamas. By the way, pray, please, if you don't need me to tell you, pray that they get somewhere and that there is peace through those negotiations. But it's about power, isn't it? One having power over another, one giving power away to somebody else. And we see with Putin and Zelensky, here's Putin, he wants to have power over Ukraine and take it for his own, doesn't he? Now, that's a great big pictures of power struggles that are obvious. But even on a daily, perhaps personal level, we do experience some power struggles sometimes, don't we? We like to be in control. It's not always obvious. Do you know that my wife won't use the cruise control in the car because she's out of control? I think it's brilliant, but she won't use it. That button is a button that should be marked lose control. And I don't know what she'll do when self-driving cars come in. I don't think she'll be able to go anywhere. It'd be awful. But there we are. She doesn't like to lose control. And you will have heard, I'm sure many of you, that the church computer account was hacked a couple of weeks ago. Don't worry, no data has been lost, and there's certainly nothing confidential that's got anywhere. But I couldn't get in, and I'm the one who controls it all. And when I can't get in and I'm out of control, well, I think things are going to descend into havoc. It's proved to me that things can go on quite happily while I'm panicking. Everybody else is chugging along quite nicely. All is well, and I'm very grateful to members of this congregation, one in particular who's been very, very helpful in sorting this business out. But it's the feeling of being out of control that is hard for us. That was the temptation in the garden to Eve, wasn't it? The evil one said to her, you can have what you like. Don't follow God. Have what you want. You can be what you want to be. You can do what you want to do. Don't take any notice of God. And that temptation was too much for her to bear, and we have been following her example ever since. Now, in the story so far in Daniel, we have seen very clearly that Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful man in the world. There's no question about that at this time. He was clearly the most powerful man in the world. He could have anything he wanted with a snap of his fingers. He could conquer other nations without even worrying about it. Here he was, in charge of the greatest empire the world had seen. And in that empire lived this one little man who we would never have known of were it not for this book, perhaps insignificant in so many ways. His name was Daniel, a foreigner, an exile, looked after by the Babylonian nation, but nonetheless still a foreigner and an exile. Where does the power lie? Well, in this passage before us today, the beginning of chapter 4, there are three key power relationships that we need to consider. Three of them. The first one is this: the relationship between Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest man in the world, and God. Now, Nebuchadnezzar has been on a journey throughout this book, and at the beginning of chapter 4, we read these words. King Nebuchadnezzar, he's writing a letter to all the peoples, nations and languages that dwell in the earth. Peace be multiplied to you. It seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Wow! Has the greatest man in the world finally got it? Has he actually clicked with who God is? Does he understand God? Well, we'll see when we see his relationship with God and the power play between them. God spoke to Nebuchadnezzar in a dream. Verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. That's what he did. He lived at ease, everything he wanted, prospering, looking at all he surveyed, owning all he surveyed. But then verse 5, I saw a dream that made me afraid. As I lay in bed, the fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. How do you alarm somebody who can do anything he wants? It's a question, isn't it? What would alarm Nebuchadnezzar? Why is he afraid? Well, God is speaking to him. And not a time when he was seeking God or a time when he was expecting God to speak. He wasn't reading his Bible. He wasn't sitting in church listening to a sermon. But God spoke to him. And he was afraid. Because God is the Almighty King. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar's was a temporary, transient kingdom. He's afraid. What is this God going to do to me? What is this dream about? Now, the big question now for Nebuchadnezzar is, if I want to understand this dream that God has given me, where should I go? Who should I ask to tell me what it means? Look at verse 6. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. What? The wise men of Babylon? He's back with the Babylonians again. But what about verses 1 to 3, where he said God is the greatest? Shouldn't he go to God? Fact is, he hasn't really got it, has he? He can make a statement about how great God is, but he's not living it, is he? He's not left his old ways. Old habits die hard. And rather than turning from his old ways to God, he's added his understanding of God into his old ways, hasn't he? That's what he's done. Why doesn't he ask God? Well, he might do eventually, but he's going first to his old ways. And the result of going to the old ways is predictable failure. Verse 7, the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me its interpretation. Now, when you read the dream, it doesn't seem that difficult, does it really, to interpret it this time? The dream he had before, a bit more difficult. But this one, it doesn't seem that difficult. Why couldn't those enchanters and astrologers interpret the dream? Well, maybe two reasons. Maybe one, God had blinded them to it. But maybe, and perhaps more likely, they could interpret the dream, but they daren't tell Nebuchadnezzar because they were scared of what he would do. To be told, you're going to be cut down, king. You think you're great? You think you're the greatest? You're not greater than God. See, in this passage at the beginning of chapter 4, it may look like Nebuchadnezzar has submitted to God. Like he has got it. In our terms, like he has become a Christian. Of course, that's anachronistic, but that's what we would say. But the truth is, he'll only follow God when it suits him. All the rest of the time, he does whatever he wants to do. He goes back to his old ways, enjoys his old pleasures, his old habits. But when he needs God, he kind of takes him off the shelf and consults him. In difficult times, he reverts to his old ways. Who has the power in the relationship between Nebuchadnezzar and God? Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest man in the world. Nobody greater than him. But who has the power? God does. Because God can fill Nebuchadnezzar, even that great man, with fear. Now, it's interesting to note, as a kind of side issue here, why didn't God strike Nebuchadnezzar down because he was rebellious? Why didn't he get rid of him and put somebody else in his place? I think the answer is because God is being gracious and merciful. He's speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. He's saying, look, Nebuchadnezzar, it's no good just recognizing that I'm God. You've got to give up your old ways and turn to me, and you'll be okay. And I'm going to show you what might happen if you don't. That's the point, isn't it? God is being gracious. He's giving Nebuchadnezzar an opportunity to turn to God before it's too late. Now, when difficult things happen to you or happen to us, when hard things happen in your family or amongst your friends, and some of those things can be really, really hard to come to terms with and to deal with, where do you go for understanding? Where do you go for comfort? Where do you go for help? Where do you go for solace in those difficult times? Do you go to God or do you go somewhere else? A lot of people turn away from God in those times because they say, if God's let this happen to me, he must hate me, and I'm not going to him. Exactly the wrong response. And the reason for that response is because those people have not truly acknowledged that they need to serve God, that God is not there to serve them. Who's actually holding the reins? Who's holding the reins in your relationship with God? If you are ultimately holding the reins, not letting God in or trying to make God do what you think he should do or what you want him to do, you're going to be disappointed. I can say that categorically. You will be disappointed. If you think God is there for your benefit, what are you going to do when things don't go your way? That doesn't mean that God doesn't love to bless his people. It doesn't mean that God doesn't give us wonderful things out of his grace and out of his mercy. But that's not his purpose. He's not there for our benefit. Nebuchadnezzar believed he was. The next power relationship is this one. It's between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. Look at verse 8. At last Daniel came in before me, he who was named Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream. At last, here comes Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar reminds us he's called Belteshazzar after my God, says Nebuchadnezzar, not the God. See who is his true God? And along comes Daniel to interpret the dream. And Nebuchadnezzar explains his dream to Daniel. Who has the power now in that relationship? Nebuchadnezzar thinks he has. He feels like he has because he's summoned Daniel. Daniel is doing his bidding. But is he? The one who actually has the power in this relationship is the insignificant, the humble, the virtually nobody Daniel. Because he holds in his hands what God is saying to the king. He is God's man. And Nebuchadnezzar tells Daniel his dream. And it's about a great big tree that grew and became powerful and mighty. Verse 12, its leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, and it was food for all. And so he goes on. But the dream changes. You know, dreams can do very strange things. Just look at what happens in verse 16. We'll go from verse 15. The tree is chopped down. Verse 15, but leave the stump of its roots to the earth. bound with a band of iron and bronze, amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed for a man's. The tree is changed from a tree into a man, hasn't it? Interesting twist in the dream. Even as Nebuchadnezzar is telling the dream, you're sitting there thinking, how can he not see it? He's given half the interpretation. It's not about a tree, it's about a man who's powerful in all the world. It's clear to him, but he doesn't really get it. But Daniel does. Daniel knows the interpretation. He sees the interpretation. He sees what God is saying to Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel looks at Nebuchadnezzar. He knows that he has the power of life and death. Say the wrong thing, and Daniel is done for. What's he going to do? Well, quite rightly, he was scared. Verse 19. Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. Those thoughts, well, we don't know what his thoughts are, but we can imagine. What on earth is the king going to do to me when I tell him what this dream means? This is terrifying. But Nebuchadnezzar encourages him to be honest and truthful. The second half of verse 19. The king answered and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. Belteshazzar answered. So Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, Daniel, I don't mind what it says. I'm more interested in knowing what the dream is about than worrying about what I might do to you. And so off Daniel goes, telling this dream to the king. The most powerful man in the world being addressed by an insignificant exile. Here he is, verse 21. Whose leaves were beautiful and his fruit abundant, and food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king. It is you who've grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. Now, so far, so good. That's a great message, isn't it? You're the greatest in all the world, Nebuchadnezzar. You're the greatest. But it doesn't stop there, does it? Verse 23, because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. Greatest man in all the world. But God is even greater. Nebuchadnezzar, you, although you're great, undoubtedly great, you are going to be humbled because God is going to do that to you. That's quite a message, isn't it? Nebuchadnezzar thought he was untouchable. He was wandering around in his palace, enjoying all that he had. And God said to him, Nebuchadnezzar, you think you're untouchable? You're not. And I'll show you. Nebuchadnezzar had a massive, massive ego. That's very clear. He built a statue to himself before. Massive ego. He had all the money, all the power, everything he wanted. He made Elon Musk look like a pauper. He had everything. And at the beginning of chapter 4 here, he is extolling the greatness of God. But it seems that he believes God is there just for him. Everybody serves Nebuchadnezzar, and as far as Nebuchadnezzar is concerned, even God does too. But he has a lesson to learn. Wonder if we're ever like that? God is there just to help me. God is there to make my life better, for my benefit. Well, those things may very well be true, but that's not God's purpose. God is the mighty God, the King of all the universe. Our role is to submit to him, not hold him as some kind of magic charm that gives us what we want and keeps our lives happy and good. That's not who God is. So we've seen the relationship between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. We've seen the relationship between Nebuchadnezzar and God. And of course, the third relationship is very clear. It's between Daniel and God, isn't it? Here's the third relationship. And just look how Daniel conducts himself in comparison with Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is alarmed, he's worried, he's frantic to get his dream interpreted. Daniel, he comes across as calm and compassionate to the king. He has a strong relationship with God. Even though the king is a bit of a tyrant, even though the king may take Daniel's life, and we saw that with the fiery furnace, didn't we? Even though the king may do the worst he can do, Daniel is still humble before God and doing what's right. Sure, he's concerned about the consequences. Nobody wants to have their head removed. But he says he's still humble before God. I'm going to obey God before I obey Nebuchadnezzar. And as Daniel is humble before God, in comparison to the kind of frantic nature of Nebuchadnezzar, God speaks through Daniel. Whatever the consequences might be, God speaks through Daniel. In this passage, it is God who is in control through Daniel. The one who has the least control is the one who, when you first read the passage, seems to have the most. Nebuchadnezzar. This is God and Daniel, bringing God's power to bear on the power of Nebuchadnezzar, the power of the world, to bring humility to the greatest man in the world, because God is even greater. And Nebuchadnezzar needs to learn that, and by the mercy and grace of God, he has a chance. You know, Daniel and his friends had a pretty tough life. We see them being honoured and things in the book of Daniel, but when you think about the length of their life, there's only a few instances where they're honoured, and there's no evidence that they carry that great honour on for very long. Daniel and his friends had a hard time. They were exiles in a foreign land. They were away from their family, away from the home that they knew. They were away from the temple and its worship of God. God seemed a million miles away from them. They were foreigners in a strange culture. And understand this, they would never see their home again. They were foreigners in a strange culture for the entirety of their lives. Where was God? They could have given up on God quite easily. They could have said this: if God allows this to happen to me, why should I trust him? God doesn't care about me. They might go one step further and say, well, if God doesn't help me, maybe either he's unable to, in which case he's not worth following anyway because he's not very powerful, or he's unwilling to help, in which case I don't want to follow him if he doesn't want to help me. That's how the logic goes, isn't it? They could have given up on God quite easily. They could have been influenced by all the culture around them. But they didn't. They remained faithful for all their lives, for all those years, not because of what God has done or did for them, Because it actually, on the face of it, wasn't really that much. They were faithful to God, not because of what God does, but because of who God is. Their message is God is the greatest in all the universe. That's why we want to serve him. That's why we want to be faithful to him. What did they get in return? Their lives will be hard. Their lives will be sad. They'd find things difficult in exile. And they would die in exile. What kind of a God is that? That's a good question. And it's a kind of God who is still King of all the universe. Because God's greatness doesn't depend on what happens to these exiles. They trusted God. They followed him. Ultimately, they were with him forever. And as they look back from glory on their time in exile, well, that fades into insignificance, doesn't it? They served God because God is God. And it is God's greater glory that matters far more than their comfort. It's quite a lesson to learn, isn't it? Especially for us in 21st century in this country, where all around us seems to be about being comfortable and about healthy and wealthy and having a great career and fulfilled and all these kinds of things. Where's God? We should serve him because of who he is, not because of what he does. Let's bow our heads to pray.